night. How is everybody?
Good.
Alrighty. I haven't seen you for a while, but I'm back. Anyway, and I'm going to be teaching tonight in at least 2 more classes, I think. So I'll be seeing you here as we get through spring and get on to the Easter Vigil and so forth. So as Emily said, I'm talking tonight about the sacraments of marriage and holy orders. Which one should I start with?
You went pretty deep last year. What do you guys think? You want to start with marriage?
All right, we'll start with marriage, because I can go either way. So, I want to start, though, by talking about sacraments. And I know you've already heard from the other guys their definition of sacraments. But I want to give you mine, which is going to be very similar to theirs. But there's different elements to what sacraments are. So just to flesh things out, let me talk about the definition of sacraments, and this will fit right in with marriage and with holy orders. So after I talk about that, I'll stop, see if anybody has any questions. Then we'll get into marriage, stop, see if anybody has any questions, get into holy orders, and I'll even talk about how holy orders and marriage are actually kind of related to each other. Okay? So, sacraments. I go back to when I was really young, and I'm old enough that I was being taught from what was called the Baltimore Catechism, which I like a lot. Some people poke fun at it, but if you're 55, 60 or older, you probably remember it. The definition of classic definition of a sacrament that I was first taught when I was in grade school, Sunday school, back in the 1960s, was a sacrament is an outward sign instituted by Christ that gives grace. So there's 2 things, let's unpack that for a moment. There's 2 things going on there. And as I talk about holy orders of marriage, I'm going to talk about how it relates to this. I won't stray too far from your phone.
Oh, you're fine.
Anyway, but I come at, anytime I'm talking about a sacrament, I always want to make sure people see where I'm coming from on this. Outward sign instituted by Christ, there's 2 levels going on here, 2 facets to that. Outward sign means that there is a visible reality going on. So which sacraments have we talked about so far? Baptism, pouring of water, the anointings, things like that. So there's outward signs, okay? What other sacraments have you talked about? You had Monsignor last week. You were talking about reconciliation. Did he talk about anointing also? Yes. So, again, outward signs. The anointing on the head, the hands, and sometimes the feet. And with the reconciliation, outward signs. You're going and talking to a priest or a bishop. Okay. Some people do try to confess to deacons who have to say, wait, hold on a second here. Anyway, with marriage and with holy orders, there are lots of outward signs to those. Okay. So, there is outward signs to each of the 7 sacraments. And I'll talk about those outward signs with marriage and holy orders. Instituted by Christ, second facet of this, so important, okay? That gives grace. Now, has anybody given you their handy-dandy definition of grace? What have you been taught about grace so far? This is so absolutely crucial. Nothing coming to mind? Okay. As we talk about sacraments and as we talk about the life of faith, we always have to hold on to and understand grace, okay? My easy definition, there are people who write books this thick about grace, and there's all kinds of grace. I won't plunge into that because we'll be here all night talking about that. And grace is the experience of God's help and love. And anybody who is a Christian, anybody who is a follower of Jesus Christ, believes that it is absolutely necessary to have faith and to embrace God's grace. Believing in God means believing in God's grace. It means that we understand that we cannot get through life and attain salvation without God's grace. God's grace, God's love, and help is granted freely by God for us to embrace as much as we want to. Okay? We, as Christians, as Catholics, any Christian believes we cannot get through without God's grace and without embracing that, without having faith in that. Okay? God's grace is all around us. It's like the air. You can't see it or feel it or so forth, but you can experience it. Okay? So I want you to keep thinking in the weeks as you approach Easter Vigil and the completion of this journey, how crucially important grace is. I can't say that enough. Grace comes of all those sacraments. When we participate in those sacraments, we are experiencing God's love and grace, instituted by Jesus Christ. Every single sacrament in the Bible, its origin can be traced back to the Bible. Okay? Monsignor, and I'm sure the other guys have been talking about with baptism and so forth, those biblical origins. So that deposit of faith that is in Holy Scripture tells us where those were instituted by God, by Jesus Christ. And, Jesus is God. So it's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, those three persons in one God, working together and providing us that grace that we need. But always, always, always embrace God's grace. Think about God's grace. Keep working to understand God's grace. Because we cannot get to heaven and salvation on our own human power. As Christians, as Catholics, we believe that is not possible. We have to have God to get there. And that's the experience of God's help and love and concern is what gets us there. Human power alone is not enough. I cannot emphasize that enough. So, anyway, so some good foundation there. Two levels, two facets again. An outward visible reality and a spiritual reality. A spiritual reality that comes from God and provides us the experience of grace. Now, grace can be experienced outside of the sacraments also, okay? You can experience grace when you're enjoying God's creation. You can experience grace when you're falling in love with someone and getting ready for marriage, okay? You guys just got married recently, right? So you know what I'm talking about. And I prepped you and your wife for marriage, so you know what I'm talking about. I mean, all of us who know what we're talking about with this, right? So, the other thing that I think is important with sacraments is I don't want you to think that we're practicing some kind of spiritual Catholic voodoo. Okay? The outward sign enters us into the reality. God is not giving us our grace because we did the ceremony just right. Although we put an emphasis, believe me, we put an emphasis, those of us who are ordained, it's driven home. Make sure you do those rituals correctly. The church finds that very important, right? But the prayers, the rituals bring you into that spiritual reality, bring you into the grace, that experience of grace that's being offered. God doesn't react because we do the ritual correctly. The ritual and the visible reality is for us, to bring us into that, okay? Now again, the church is particular about how we do the rituals. And they're beautiful rituals, okay? They're beautiful. And the more you understand them, the more you're going to be awestruck by them. You know, when you further research learn about the history and why the Mass is the way it is, why the Eucharist is confected by a priest or a bishop the way it is, why ordinations are the way they are. They are beautiful. The other thing about visible reality, and one of the things I love so much about our Catholic faith, is it is so sensory oriented. You can go to a Catholic ritual and you see it, you hear it, you can feel it at times. You can smell it, like when we're having incense and things like that. Some people sneeze from that, but and I do too, but I don't mind. I enjoy when I'm using incense and things like that, right? I baptized my grandson this past weekend, and there's 2 anointings with that, right? One with the oil of salvation on the chest and the chrism on his head. You can smell the pine in the balsam that's in chrism and so forth, okay? All right, I think that's enough, but I'm going to keep tying what I just said into marriage and holy orders. And I challenge you to keep doing that as you go through the remaining, or is this the last of them? Or wait, have you done confirmation yet?
Yeah. Did we do confirmation? I'll have to double check mine.
Okay. Well, as you think about sacraments, so when you go to Mass and you see the Eucharist, because that's one of the sacraments, think about what I said. What visible realities are you experiencing, and what spiritual realities? How are you experiencing the spiritual reality of God's grace? Now, marriage. One of the 7 sacraments in the church. It is also a universally recognized sacrament among all Christian denominations. Every one of us agrees that marriage is a sacrament. There is some debate among Christian denominations about how many sacraments are there. Are there 7? Are there more? Are there less? Not every Christian faith tradition out there feels that there's 7. So but baptism and marriage are the 2 universally recognized sacraments across all Christian denominations. So that's why when someone is married in another church and then they become Catholic, we don't make them get remarried again if they're validly married in that other church, because we recognize that as a sacrament. Okay. Now, let me give you the canonical definition of marriage. And I think you've heard me mention the Code of Canon Law. And when I do 10 Commandments, I'll go into this a little more. Canon number 1055 is the church's definition of marriage. And it defines marriage as a relationship between a man and a woman for their mutual benefit and for the purpose of having a family. It's exactly what it says. What word is missing from that? What word didn't you hear there?
Forever. Definitely forever.
Love.
But love, yep. Is that you, Denise? Yeah. It doesn't say love, but it presumes that love is at the foundation of that relationship. But the word love doesn't come up in that definition. But, and love is presumed in many ways and in many relationships, like love between brothers and sisters, parents and child, husband and wife. So not every love is romantic love. So, in the Catholic Church, and this is a sore point in society between the Catholic Church and a lot of the rest of society, we believe that marriage is between one man and one woman, okay? And the Catholic Church is not going to change that, okay? We also, every marriage is expected to be open to the rearing of children. So those of you who have been married in the Catholic Church, You remember when Father or Deacon asked you those questions? Remember I called them those funny little sounding questions where we're making sure there's no impediments. And one of them is, are you open to having children? And we have to hear, yes. Okay? Otherwise, we got to stop. Talk about it. Okay? Because if people have an intention against children, that's not going to be a valid attempt at marriage. People have to be open. Now, if people cannot have children, that's not an impediment. They have to be open to it. Okay? There are couples who, unfortunately, discover they cannot have children, but people just have to be open to it. So, and people have to also be able to, because a marriage has to be consummated. And so, one of those other questions that we asked during marriage prep, during that interview with the couple is, are you capable of consummating the marriage? And if there is an inability to not consummate the marriage, then that would not be considered a valid marriage either. Okay? Now, with modern medical technology, that is a much different situation than in the past, because there's all sorts of treatments for that also. I'm not a doctor, not an expert on it, so I'm not going to go down that. But when Monsignor Maloney, Father Ferguson, Deacon Dowler, or I are preparing couples, many of you who've worked with us know we ask those questions to make sure that there's no impediments. Okay. We also are working to make sure that the couple knows what they're doing and understands what they're doing. And we ask them to do some preparation and formation. I like to call it formation these days, not just preparing for a wedding. And anybody who's worked with, I can't speak for the other guys, but anybody who's worked with me, it's about the second to last meeting where we start talking about the wedding, and we're focused on the formation for that sacrament. Okay, so now marriage is considered permanent. In the Bible, marriage is referred to a lot in the Bible. Now, in the Old Testament, you had some of those characters some of those guys have multiple wives, and that comes out, right? But Jesus Christ clarified that in the gospel where he said, it's a man and a woman, and he made it clear that you are to be with your one spouse for the remainder of your life. Now, if your spouse passes away, then a person in the Catholic Church can be remarried, okay? But one spouse at a time. Not like in the Bible where some of those people had dozens and dozens of them. That sounds like a very complicated home life to me. And we ask, do you consider yourself capable of fulfilling the obligations of marriage? Okay? Now, with marriage, I know with the marriage prep, we also ask couples to we do premarital inventories, and it looks sort of like, the one I use looks like an SAT sheet. I'm not sure what Deacon Dower used with you guys. Was it the facet one? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's the same one I used with you. And you're right. Anyway, we want the couples who are getting married to get to know each other. My wife and I dated for 3 years before we got married. And my wife's a year and a half older than me, so once we were both out of college, we couldn't wait anymore, so we got married within about 3 months of graduating from college. And we had a blast at our wedding, too. So that's back when you could do a wedding for $1,500. 1984. I don't know what inflation would make that now, but. And I'm told nowadays the average wedding costs $25,000 to $30,000, and I've heard of weddings running into 6 figures. So, we want couples to stop and think, all right? And it's important to do that. My wife and I discovered things about each other, and after 3 years, we thought we knew everything about each other, right? How many of you found things out that you didn't know about your spouse 10 years after you got married, or 20 years, or 30 years? Yep, I see a hand going up over there. It is a continual journey of learning. But we want you to know each other enough when you're getting married that you can spend a lifetime with that person. And my wife and I are going on 39 years now. And, I tell people it takes a lot of work to keep that going. And you've got to really be committed to each other. You've got to be very forgiving too. So there's all sorts of grace experiences there. You get to experience the grace of romantic love. Eros is the word for that in Greek. Okay, that's the kind of love that happens between a married man and a woman. And you get to experience the grace of forgiveness, where you have to say, "Well, I'm sorry, honey," for some bonehead thing that one or the other of us has done to the other person. So there's so many opportunities to forgive each other, right? So if you're engaged, you're just getting started. You guys are, okay, yeah. Now, there's the wonderful, wonderful grace of having children. And I found children to be one of the hardest things that came of my marriage, and it's also the most joyful thing. Now, being a grandpa now is really cool, but I'm a rookie at being a grandpa. So I just... like I said, I baptized my grandson this weekend. He also squawked the entire time, which a surprising number of babies do that during baptism. So if you're an experienced cleric, you get used to it. You just keep going. So anyway, there's that wonderful grace of bringing life into the world. Okay, there's that wonderful joy that you experience with each other. There's that wonderful experience of spending a lifetime together. When my wife and I got married, I had a full head of brown hair, and my wife had blondish brown hair. Neither one of us have ever done anything to our hair color. We watched each other get gray. We've been with each other and experienced the grace of helping each other. So there's so much grace that comes from that. When her parents were dying both times, she said, "I've got to go spend time with my mom. I've got to go spend time with my dad." Letting her go and doing that so that she could do that. That wonderful grace. When her mother died, though, we still had little kids. I got to experience what being a single parent was like for 5 weeks. So grace came with that. Maybe a lot more sympathetic and understanding toward people who are single parents. So think about that. When I had to go home and tell my wife in 2014, "Oh, honey, I have cancer. I just learned this," right? Grace of healing, grace of leaning on each other, okay? My parents have been very sick in recent months, and I keep telling my wife, "Thank you so much for being there for me through this terrible, difficult time." So, and all of us have gone through things like this. So think, grace comes of each one of those things, right? We all have to bear our crosses. And when you're married, you're helping each other bear those crosses, right? Just like when Jesus was bearing his cross and he fell, and they asked Simon the Cyrene to help Jesus bear that cross. That's what a husband and wife do for each other. That's that mutual good that definition talks about. And you do that in a loving way. And yes, we're going to lose our temper with each other when you're married too, but there's so much grace that comes of that. So I can't emphasize that enough. Another thing is marriage is considered a reflection of God's love for us. And every wedding, and I've done about 80 or so weddings over the years that I've been ordained a deacon, and I end every wedding homily with this thought for the couple. And the couples know it's coming, because I talk about this during the marriage prep, and I say to them, your marriage, the greatest role model for you as a married couple is Jesus Christ on the cross. Now, I always reassure everybody that I'm not saying marriage is like a lifelong crucifixion. But what did Jesus do on that cross? He poured out his life on that cross for us so that we could be with him in heaven. He opened that way between human and divine when he hung on that cross. He poured out his life. A couple who is getting married is doing the same thing. They're pouring their life out for each other the way Jesus Christ poured his life out for all of us. That couple is giving themselves to each other so completely that they're pouring their life out for each other. And I always encourage couples to have crucifixes around to remind them that that's what they're doing for each other, pouring themselves out for each other the way Christ poured himself out for us. And that is a beautiful thing to hold on to. It's a tough image to hold on to, too. And it takes courage to pour yourself out like that. It takes courage in a marriage, and it takes humility in a marriage to pour out. In the book of Genesis, God says, two shall become one. A man and a woman shall leave their family and cleave to each other. My wife and I used that for our first reading at our wedding way back in ancient times. So you are, again, there's a real setting aside of the self in a successful marriage, and two really become one. It's no longer about her and him. They don't look at each other and say me and her or me and him. They are challenged to look at each other and say always us. Now, I also want people to understand that marriage is a three-way relationship. The other person in this is God. And when couples are really hitting on that spiritual level, as well as their love and friendship and so forth, God really can become a part of that relationship. You may not be running around talking about God and faith all the time, but when you have God as an innate part of your life, then you have a really wonderful experience, not just with each other, but with God. And you are reflecting for the rest of the world the way you show love for each other in a marriage. That couple is also considered to be a visible sign of Christ. This couple loves each other the way Christ loves us. So I want you to hold on to that. Okay? Any questions so far about marriage? All right. Now, in the gospel, Jesus said, anybody who enters into marriage lawfully, only God can divide that. And that means we believe in the permanence of marriage. Okay? That means that when a marriage has been entered into lawfully, that marriage ends when you leave the world. Okay? We believe that. Now, a key word to understand there is lawfully, because there are marriages, and in the United States, the divorce rate is somewhere around 50%. It's been that way for decades. And so a lot of marriages end. And you may have heard of people getting annulments, things like that. The key to that and understanding that is Jesus talked about marriages entered into lawfully. And I've worked with quite a few annulments over the years and helping people get an annulment so they could move on. Because what an annulment is looking for is, was everything valid or not? Did people have proper discretion? Was there pressure to marry and things like that? Okay? So that's, when you hear about annulments, that's what they're talking about. But we believe that if a marriage has been entered into lawfully and validly, then it should never be divided. Okay? There are couples who will experience challenges during their marriage. In fact, if anybody here I hope nobody thinks marriage is Shangri-La for the rest of your life. I honestly feel that there are marriages that have had problems and challenges. There are marriages that are having challenges, and there are marriages that will have challenges. Everybody who's married is going to be through all of that at some point or another, right? My wife and I have never been tempted to divorce each other. We've been there through thick and thin. But when she was gone, my wife, this is back in 2007, when she was gone for 5 weeks and I was doing the whole single dad thing, oh, that was challenging, right? But that grace got us through, okay? Couples will have disagreements, and once in a while a couple will say to me, we're so in love, we've never had a fight. And I try not to sound flippant when I say this, but I say, I hope you have the experience of having a serious disagreement at some point before the wedding so you can see if you still like each other afterwards. And that grace of forgiveness is when you do have a disagreement, whether it's small or something really big, you know, you make that conscious choice of, okay, he or she acted like a schmuck yesterday, but I'm going to forgive them, and we're still going to stay together and get through that and so forth. Everybody who's married has to go through those things, okay? Now, some of the things that we're looking for with validity with marriage, again, I've mentioned openness to children. We have to see that. Is it clear they understand? And that's why we take time to do marriage prep in the Catholic Church, so we can catechize and help people understand what it is from a Christian Catholic point of view that marriage is. Okay? Any other questions about marriage? Okay. Let me talk about weddings and some of these, the sacramental experience itself. Okay? I'm sure everybody here has been at a wedding. I'm sure almost everybody here has been in a Catholic wedding, right? And in a wedding, there are two types of weddings. There's a wedding in Mass and a wedding outside of Mass, okay? And the Church's preference, pretty strong preference, is that if it's two Catholics getting married, that they get married within the context of Mass, and that they have the experience of the Eucharist along with that, okay? The Church has a pretty strong preference that if one of them is Catholic and one of them is non-Catholic, that it be a wedding outside of Mass. And there's a real wisdom in that, because everything at a wedding, everything at that marriage ritual should be unitive. Now, if it's a Catholic and a baptized Christian getting married once in a while, and the pastor would have to approve, Monsignor Maloney has occasionally approved a wedding mass for a Catholic and a non-Catholic Christian. He always says no if the other person is not baptized. But it's strongly preferred that that mixed marriage couple will get married outside of Mass, because if it's at a Mass, you're going to have to say to all the non-Catholics, including the non-Catholic spouse, you need to sit down for this part of this. And they have to watch their spouse going up and participating in something that they cannot. And so when I talk to, and deacons typically preside at the mixed marriage weddings here. And you know, I always explain that, and the beauty of being able to have both families participate fully, have the husband and the wife be able to participate fully. So there is a wisdom to that. All right. Yes.
I do have a quick question. If you have a wedding like that where you have one that's Catholic and one's not, you don't have the celebration of the Eucharist, is that still a sacrament? Is the celebration of the marriage, is it still considered a sacrament?
Yes.
It is, okay.
Anytime two Christians get married is considered a sacramental marriage. Okay? Now, when a Catholic or a Christian marries a unbaptized person, it's not a sacramental marriage, but it is considered a valid marriage. And if that other person does become Christian, like Catholic or other, gets baptized, it can't snap my finger loud tonight, automatically becomes a sacramental marriage. So if a Catholic marries a Jewish person, I presided this past summer at a ceremony between a Catholic and a Jewish person. It was not a sacramental marriage, but it was valid. And I remember her aunt came up to me afterwards, and because they also got permission to have it off-site, neutral territory out of consideration for his family. Some people who aren't Catholic don't want to go into a Catholic church, so we had it at a neutral site. And I remember her aunt came up to me, the Catholic, the bride was the Catholic. Deacon, was this valid? And I almost said, well, I'm here. I wouldn't do something invalid. But I reassured and said, no, of course it is, and we used the proper, and we got the dispensation and so forth. So anyway, I know it sounds funny, but you can get a dispensation and permission for family harmony to move some weddings to a neutral site, but not if they're both Catholic, typically, okay?
Here's the question, you're talking about grace?
Uh-huh.
And then they get married, say a Jewish person and a Christian gets married. It's not sacramental. When they do become baptized, do they get the graces then from that marriage?
Get the grace of baptism. But there's a grace that comes from a valid marriage too, even if it's not sacramental. So I would not call that an ungraced marriage by any means.
Well, I kind of heard that if they do become a Christian then they graces they get the graces then for that from the wedding, from the marriage. Right,
Yeah, that's correct. But even if the person doesn't convert, it doesn't mean that there's no grace there. So make sure you don't think that.
Right.
Okay? But yeah, that grace of being in a sacramental marriage would come. But again, with the right dispensations and things, it's valid and so forth. Okay, so I want everybody to understand that. Sometimes we have given permission for two Catholics to go to a neutral site. That's really rare. And working in the bishop's office, Monsignor Maloney and I both have delegation from the bishop to make decisions about those. So when people say, well, we want to get married at the Park of Roses or at the beach and we're both Catholics, it's like, okay, we really need to talk to you about the church being the ordinary place of sacramental experience for two Catholics. And we have said no to some of those things. But one time, and this was a beautiful situation, I got called and a couple wanted to move their wedding to one of the parents' house because the mother of one of them was dying and had about a day to live. And they so badly wanted to get married in the presence of the mother. Very good reason to move that wedding. So we gave permission to Catholics. So we got the priest, went to the house, did the wedding there, got all the right permissions and so forth, and they thanked us. And the mother did die the next day. I know of another one we gave permission for two Catholics because the father and another couple of one of them had been abused at a church when he was a kid and could not bear to be in a church. Think about that pain. And we said yes, gave permission to move it to a neutral site. So there's lots of mercy there too, if there's a good reason to do it, and if there's a good pastoral reason to do it. So anyway.
But if there's not, like, and they just want the backdrop at the Park of Roses.
I asked the priest or the deacon to really talk to them about why it's important to be in the sacred space, because that's the ordinary space for two Catholics to receive those sacraments. Having sacraments outside of that space should be more the exception than the rule.
Yeah.
So
is it still considered like a sacramental marriage, even if they say, we get it, we understand that this should be done at the church, this isn't what we want it at the Park of Roses? Does the Catholic Church go through with performing those wishes, or are they saying,
not
sorry,
always.
we're not? gonna
Right.
be able to perform the wedding.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so.
But then is it still considered, it's not a sacrament if a priest or a deacon?
No, but there is ways to fix that later, so.
Okay,
There's people who've come to us and said, yeah, we got married at the beach or something. So you can validate a marriage one of two ways. First of all, you gotta make sure they were both free to marry in the first place. And then you can do either a convalidation ceremony where they would say the vows again with a priest or a deacon. And they have to understand that they're making a new act of the will. Or you can get a special thing from the bishop's office called a radical sanation, where the priest or deacon working with that couple, they examine and make sure that consent was truly exchanged at the time on the beach or at the justice of the peace or whatever. And then the couple would be granted a favor of that sanation and a declaration, because there is a principle of canon law that says there are circumstances where the church can provide that which is lacking, in this case validity, and then do it that way. But a priest or a deacon would get in trouble, a lot of trouble, if they went out and did something somewhere where they weren't supposed to. So, but it's our priests here who are mostly working with the two Catholics. So, but anyway.
Yeah, you helped us out a lot. We had, our wedding was supposed to be in 2020, but obviously COVID. And so we moved it and we did it in my hometown, like 10 people total. And we had a Episcopal, my wife's grandpa was an Episcopal minister or priest, and so he did our vows then, but then we got basically remarried in the Catholic Church. But I grew up Methodist, she grew up Catholic. We had my pastor come and do a co-ceremony with Deacon Berg, so it was a whole thing. We made it work.
During the pandemic, we were being as flexible as possible. What you're referring to is we actually gave a dispensation for a non-Catholic minister, because at the time you were not Catholic.
Right.
So it was perfectly valid, because sometimes the non-Catholic might say, my dad or my uncle is a minister, really want to have it over here at that church, and the bishop's office can give that dispensation when one of them is non-Catholic and the other one is. And I've been present at some of those weddings working with that Protestant minister, but that dispensation from the bishop's office gives the non-Catholic, gives that couple the permission to do that. So during the pandemic, we were trying to be as flexible as possible. And that's a pretty routine dispensation that's given, because sometimes, again, for family harmony and so forth, we say, okay, yeah, it's fine, and we'll give the dispensation so it'll be valid and so forth, because that Protestant minister might be a family member who's very special. We don't want to disrupt the family harmony and so forth. So, but the part where we get a little bit harder nosed is with two Catholics. So, but I've granted tons of dispensations over the years for a Catholic and a non-Catholic to get married at a suitable site with a minister who means a lot to the non-Catholic person. Emily?
I have two quick questions. Would this be an example? Last week we talked about the keys of Peter, right? Locking and unlocking, with forgiveness and annulment, or is this another example of the key of Peter that sounds like with a little bit of allowing certain things with going through the proper channels
Right.
of
Yeah, I would
authority?
say so. Yeah. Exactly.
My other question would be, briefly, does a wedding need to take place on holy ground? Is there actually a requirement for two Catholics? Is that one of the requirements? Blessed ground or something to that extent?
Yeah, it's normative for two Catholics to receive the sacraments within the sacred space of church. So, and that is holy ground, that's consecrated and so forth. And it's just considered normative. But again, sometimes there's reasons to switch to other places. And See, when a couple is working with a priest or a deacon, that priest or deacon can help them with exceptions and things being requested. So, you were also referring to the second wedding.
Yeah.
So the valid canonical wedding and what was going to show up on your baptismal certificates is the first one.
Yep.
But they had to have this small ceremony. It wasn't like a really windy day up in Michigan. I remember you guys telling me about that, right? But they still, just out of mercy, we told a lot of couples, if you have a little wedding and it's in the middle of the pandemic and you want to have a big wedding later, the second wedding is not the wedding, but it was, so Monsignor Maloney was very open to that, and we had a number of those where we were doing big weddings later on when we could all take these things off, and there wasn't quite such a bad pandemic going on. So again, just so people could have that experience of having a big wedding. So, and we even said the vows the same way again too. We were, again, being flexible and so forth. So I had a lot of fun with you guys that
Yeah,
day.
that was a good time. It was like I'm actually kind of happy we did the first wedding because like we got all our nerves out. Like I got to really like enjoy it. And, like it was like I don't know, it was really fun.
Yeah, it was like no pressure, you know.
I still cried when she came down the aisle.
Yeah.
You know, I'd already seen it. It was so
Oh yeah, that was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. I had one couple where they said, you know, we'd like to do a little wedding because it was the height of the pandemic and everything. And they decided to come to St. Andrew because they both live here in town. So we did the little wedding. And then we were starting to plan the big wedding. And interestingly, they did the opposite thing. They called me up and they said, you know what, we don't want to do a big wedding. They were so happy with that little wedding, they decided just to leave it at that. And it was here at the church and everything was valid. It was about a 15-minute ceremony because we just did the rite of marriage. We weren't doing the whole thing. And it was in the middle of when stuff was at its worst. But something in them moved them to just say, you know what, we're just going to stick with that little ceremony. They said it was so wonderful for them and it meant so much, even though it was so small. And we did it in the little chapel over there. And they said, we just want to hold on to that moment the rest of our life. We don't need a second. So we were being very accommodating during that. So, any other questions about marriage? Because I also want to make sure I have time to talk about holy orders. Denise?
You said something about the difference between a marriage and as part of a mass or another type. What's the difference?
A wedding outside of Mass?
Yeah.
Yeah. A wedding outside of Mass is almost the same, except the Eucharistic rites are left out. So, when I'm presiding at a wedding, procession down, just like, you know, all the music and everything, all the pomp and circumstance. Jane and Aaron here are making sure everything's going smoothly, our wedding coordinators. And yeah, you guys got to meet Jane.
great.
You guys got to meet Jane and Aaron too, I know. And then there's the opening prayers. There's the readings. The priest or the deacon is preaching. Now, when I preach at a wedding, I keep it to about 7 minutes or so because there's a lot of distractions going on, right? Nobody wants a 15-minute theological. But you can also pack a lot of good stuff in 7 minutes. But weddings and funerals, sometimes we joke that weddings and funerals kind of call for a short homily. So, then there's the wedding rite, okay, the rite of marriage. The rite of marriage can be done as quickly as about 3-4 minutes. So if you leave everything out, it's still a valid marriage. And during the rite of marriage, we ask the couple 3 questions about their consent to make sure they're still consenting freely. I also tell couples, I know you remember this too, I said, this is a part where we cannot have any mistakes, but don't worry, I'll make sure you get there. And the couple was asked 3 questions about their consent. You know, are they doing this freely? Are they open to children? I'm trying to remember the other one right now. But the priest or deacon has to hear 3 positive answers. If someone says no, okay. And if it were me, I'd turn my microphone off and say, did I hear you correctly? Because if someone suddenly is starting to hold back their consent, you have to stop. Okay? Then you do the vows themselves where the couple turns to each other, joins their hands, and you do the wedding vows. There's two types of wedding vows, and the couple picks one or the other. In the Catholic Church, we do not let couples write their own marriage vows. I've been in some non-Catholic weddings of friends of ours where they wrote their own wedding vows. The one couple, their wedding vow at one of those groovy Christian churches was, I promise to have a beer with you every day. And I thought, oh, is this the best we can do? Nothing against beer, bourbon, or cocktail, right? Nothing against that. But not during the vows. And then outside of Mass, you move on to the blessings of the couple, the petitions, visit Mary if the couple wants to do that. So everything's there except for the Eucharistic rituals. And I always tack on, after I do the dismissal, you may kiss the bride. So, because everybody likes to do that. So anyway.
This is maybe just like a weird clarification. So like during a mass, are there people that would be coming to church for like a 10 o'clock mass that will be present
No,
at this?
a wedding mass
Wedding
is
or-
done not during the
Not like
Sunday
a
mass.
normal Christian like church mass. Okay.
Yeah.
Got
A wedding, it would add quite a bit of time to mess up our schedule.
Yeah, that's I couldn't quite wrap my head around.
Yeah.
We calling
We-
it a mass, and
Yeah,
that to
we,
me is like the church service.
At St. Andrew here, we do weddings on Saturdays at
Okay.
2 or at 11, sometimes on Saturday evening, sometimes on Friday evening. And the Sunday masses, you could technically, but we don't stick a wedding into a Sunday mass. Then you got all sorts of stuff going on. So,
So it's more of like the title of the
yeah,
ceremony.
it's a special mass.
Not necessarily like.
Yeah, it's
our
a
normal
special
mass.
ceremonial mass, and it just happens to have a wedding in the mass. But we always do that outside of the Sunday mass schedule. All right, let me move on to holy orders. Good back there? Okay.
Yeah, we have some, he has some questions for me.
Here's some what?
He has some more questions.
Oh, okay. I'm glad everybody's smiling. Okay. Any other questions about marriage? Because I want to take some time to talk about holy orders.
I just had one clarification.
Yes.
I know Emily had mentioned to me, when I gave you my baptismal confirmation for Holy Eucharist certificate, I was married in the Methodist church because my husband's Methodist and I was just kind of like, bi-coastal, whatever. But you had said something about sanctifying, or what was it that you called it? Like getting our marriage in the books? What is that can happen for us, or is there something?
Validating it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what exactly?
So
Has to happen.
someone who's a baptized Catholic is supposed to get married according to the form of the church. And that's in the Code of Canon Law. And I always call the Code of Canon Law it's 1,752 laws, and I always call it a Catholic's list of rights and responsibilities. So if a Catholic gets married outside of the church without a dispensation to do that, then at some point it would be ideal, should be validated. So there's a couple different ways to do that. I mentioned convalidation. I also mentioned radical sanation. And I'll say, if you want to talk about that more, you can talk to one of us, me or one of the other people, and we can certainly help you with that. That's not all that hard to do.
Now, is that something that my husband has to consent to as well? Because he's not Catholic and probably won't be Catholic.
Right. A validation does not force the other person to be Catholic, but they do have to agree to the validation. So again, I'd be happy, if you want to talk about it more, I'd be happy to do that. JT?
She kind of, that's kind of radical, whatever, I can't get that part. Yeah, that part she was talking about. I'll talk to you.
Yeah, radical sanation is one of the two ways of doing that. And radical actually is based on the Latin word radix, which means rooted. The root, radix is root. So I tell young people who are starting to take Latin that if you take Latin and pay attention, you'll learn why the word radish and radical are related to each other. So a radical sanation is getting at the root of the situation, and the sanation part is exactly what it sounds like. It's cleaning up some error. Okay. But yeah, if either one of you wants to talk about that, just let me or one of the other guys know, and we can help you with it. It's not difficult at all. So anyway, let's move on to ordination, because I have to have you out of here by 8:30. 8:49.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, I have a marriage prep couple I'm meeting with at 8:30. I gotta be conscious of,
Alright.
yeah, I don't wanna stiff them, but anyway. Alright, see you, JT.
See you, boss. Thank you.
And again, as I said, if any of you have questions, you wanna follow up with us offline, talk to us later, get in touch. And if you're not sure how to get in touch with us, Emily or Chris will help you with that. So always happy to sit down and talk to people, help them out. Okay, ordination. Ordination is, again, as I said, outward sign instituted by Christ that gives grace. By the way, there are two people, I'm pretty sure, there's only two people in this parish who have been both ordained and married. Actually, married and then ordained. You know who they are?
The two deacons.
Me, Deacon Dowler. I'm pretty sure nobody else in the parish, like 8,000 or 9,000 people, have been both married and ordained. So that's I consider that a rare privilege to be both married and ordained. I will tell you, marriage is not an impediment to ordination, but ordination is an impediment to marriage. Okay? And if you are ordained, you cannot get married in the Roman Catholic Church. So, when I was ordained, they asked us to think very carefully, because God forbid, and I'm pretty sure my wife will outlive me, but if we suddenly become widowed, we come under celibacy, which means you're carrying out a vow not to marry. Don't confuse celibacy and chastity with each other. You have to be chaste also. So, and when you're married, chastity means with you're intimate with each other, and that's it. You're not committing adultery. So, anyway, the outward signs in ordination are the things like the prayers over the guys. And right now in the Catholic Church, only men get ordained, and there's 3 levels of ordination: deacon, priest, and bishop. Okay, so there's 3 holy orders in the Catholic Church. Up until the early 70s, there were 7 of them. And please don't ask me to rattle them off. I'm not sure I can remember them all correctly. Tonsure was one of them, subdeacon, deacon. Maybe your brother could rattle them off better than I can. Her brother is Father Jonathan Wilson.
St. Paul's, yeah.
Yeah, St. Paul's, great guy. Anyway, there is the laying on of hands. If you're in an ordination, priest, deacon, and a bishop kneels down. The ordaining. Oh, let me back up about ordinary ministers of marriage and ordination. Because with each sacrament, there's ordinary ministers of that. Ordinary ministers of marriage are deacons, priests, and bishops. We all have the faculty to do marriages. If it's during Mass, though, it's supposed to be a priest. A deacon can get permission to receive the vows during a wedding Mass, like if it's his child or something like that. Although I'm one of those deacons that believes that a deacon should not try to be doing the wedding ceremony for their kid. I've done enough weddings, and you got all these things going through your head, and you're really distracted. And so when 2 of my 3 daughters have gotten married, on their wedding day, I just wanted to be dad. Now, I lay claim to all the baptisms of my grandchildren. It only takes a few minutes to set that up. So anyway, ordinary minister for ordination is a bishop. It's got to be a bishop. A priest cannot be delegated to ordain. A deacon cannot be delegated to ordain.
So when you say the marriage, the ordinary minister would be is bishop, priest, or deacon.
At a Catholic wedding.
Right.
Now, unless that dispensation has been granted for a mixed marriage couple to have the other.
So would he go above that, like a cardinal, or are they bishops?
Cardinals are. Okay, I'm going to explain this quickly.
Right.
Cardinal is something that the Pope picks you for, and it means that you are among those who will select the next Pope. Most cardinals are bishops, but cardinal is not a holy order, okay? It is a, you're in the College of Cardinals. Most cardinals, though, are bishops, and there are some cardinals who are scholars and so forth. Now, there's also age things, like if you're over 80 and you're a cardinal, you can't vote for the next pope anywhere. Because if you're a cardinal and you're under 80, you could also be elected pope. And I feel sorry for those guys, because that's got to be like the biggest job in the world to be. But the pope is the bishop of the Archdiocese of Rome and the Holy Father of the entire Catholic Church, which is, well, it's over 1 billion people. About a fourth of the people in the world are Catholic. Okay. You also will hear about bishops versus archbishops, and dioceses are grouped together. Diocese is a geographical area ruled over by a bishop. Does everybody remember our bishop's name?
Fernandez.
Bishop Earl Fernandez. Ooh. I'm giving him a promotion, sort of. Bishop Earl Fernandez, 50 years old, first bishop I worked for. He was younger than me. But 3 holy orders. Now, you also hear Monsignor, right? Our pastor, Monsignor Maloney. Monsignor is an honorific. It's not a different order, okay? So anyway, ordinary minister of ordinations is a bishop. When we were sede vacante last year, we were between bishops. We didn't have our own bishop yet, because Bishop Brennan got sent to Brooklyn and we went a few months without a bishop. There was an ordination that was done. You had to get another bishop to do that. So Monsignor Maloney here was the diocesan administrator. He was running not just our parish, but the whole diocese for a while. And we got Bishop Campbell, our retired bishop, to come and do that ordination while we were sitting at the conference. Interestingly, it was Monsignor Maloney who gave him the permission to do that, even though he was a priest, but he was the duly elected administrator of the diocese. So, during a ordination, there's, like I said, there's laying of hands, so we had to kneel down in front of the bishop, laid his hands on me, right there. And if you have bad knees, it's not easy to kneel there. So now we're a little more nicer, though. In recent ordinations, I've seen them put pillows down for the guys to kneel on. Because if you're older, that marble floor is hard to kneel on, I would say. You see, during an ordination, they prostrate themselves. So we all lay there like that while the Litany of Saints is sung. There's the prayer of consecration over the guys. That's considered the moment that that ordination is complete. Okay. There's a lot of formation that goes into being a priest or a deacon or a bishop. Okay. And every priest has been ordained a deacon first. They spend about a year, sometimes less, as a transitional deacon. So Emily's brother would have been a deacon for about a year. Okay. And then there's also permanent deacons. There are some guys who are ordained deacons. They are meant to be a permanent deacon, never to go any further. And then some guys who are priests get chosen to be bishops by the Pope. And he has to be ordained again, a bishop. So Bishop Fernandez, when we were getting ready for him to become our bishop, and I was one of the first ones who got to talk to him because Monsignor Maloney asked me to chair the installation committee. I began by talking to Father Earl Fernandez down in St. Ignatius Parish in Cincinnati. Okay, and then after he was ordained, we called him Your Excellency or Your Bishop or Bishop. So when he and I talk to each other, he gets to call me whatever I want. I do not call my bishops by their first names. That would be a little bit of a career move, I think. That would at least get you a little tut-tut. I always call them bishop. Now, my bishop usually just calls me Tom. He's my boss. He can call me whatever he wants. So, then, were you at Bishop's? Yeah. So, Emily, you got to be there. Were you there? Yeah, you were there too. Okay. So, Bishop Fernandez, when he was ordained a bishop, he prostrated himself. He was all by his lonesome up there. They had a little carpet they brought out. And we did it at St. Paul's too. So Father Wilson, Emily's brother, was our gracious host that day. And I got to work closely with him. So we had a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work too. So, but
And a lot of security.
yeah, we had over 40 police officers there at that because those kind of things get threatened a lot. So we had over 40 police officers. I was the one in charge of lining up the security, so.
And they are also like what?
We had a
Homeland
SWAT team
Security,
there.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, they were up on the roof because of threats.
Against the bishop or like?
Mhm.
There's what, 30 bishops there, right? Wasn't there something?
There was over 30
Oh,
bishops
because
there.
there's like a large number of them, not
Yeah,
just
so there's a lot of church attacks that occur in the United States as well as around the world. But we had about 40 police officers there. We were working with the Westerville Police, the Columbus Police Counterterrorism Unit, Franklin County Homeland Security. We were working with Delaware County SWAT team. We had a SWAT team there. There was people on the roofs and so forth.
Wow.
Those are things that, and there were credible threats. So there were heavily armed security there. And we had about 40 officers. About a third of them were sitting in the pews. Plainclothes officers. There was about 10 or 15 of them sitting in the pews, blending in. They were ready to go if something happened. We had an escape plan and everything. Oh, I could talk forever about that. So, we were working with Upper Arlington Police too because the rituals, the ceremonies the night before were here. So Upper Arlington Police too. So anyway, yep. But let me get back. Yes.
Sorry, is it always like that, or was it just that?
Episcopal ordinations tend to draw a lot of security. If you think that's something, I was invited to a papal mass. It was Benedict XVI up at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. I got frisked and scanned like 3 times. It was worse than going through an airport. And I saw probably hundreds of police at that. But that's a world leader. And I'd never seen security like that in my life. It made us look like nothing. But there are churches that get attacked. That's a reality. In other countries, sometimes there's bombings and things. There's been mass shootings at churches in the United States. It's a despicable thing. And there's also been church disruptions where people come in and try to disrupt religious ceremonies, which is now a criminal offense in Ohio. We had an invasion happen at the cathedral back in 3 years ago now. It was a Respect Life Mass. People came in and just disrupted it for a while. 2 minutes and 45 seconds was how long it lasted. It seemed like a long time. I was not there when it happened. I was in another building, but
I was I work at the AG's office. We were surprised that California has a law banning the disruption of religious services, but Ohio at the time didn't.
yeah, and for once we were like, we want to be like California. And Dave Yost's office was good about it. We did press charges. Several people were arrested, and they found out we bit back. So we were forgiving, but we said justice balances forgiveness. So now, Governor DeWine just signed House Law 504, I think it's called, and it is now a criminal offense in Ohio to disrupt a church ceremony. I applauded that law. So anyway, I digress. With ordination, there are 2 distinct theologies. There's the theology of the diaconate, and there's the theology of presbyterate and episcopate, priests and bishops. There's a very different theology between deacons and between bishops and priests. So I want you to remember that. Now, the word deacon comes from the Greek word diakonos, which means to serve. And deacons are ordained to be the sign of Jesus Christ the servant. And of course, the ultimate symbol of Jesus Christ the servant is Christ on the cross. There's also Christ cleaning the feet of people during the Last Supper. Jesus served in so many ways. ways. And the reason that the church has permanent deacons is the church wants that permanent sign, ideally at least one deacon in every parish. We're blessed right now to have 2 deacons here, and I was the only deacon here for about 12 years. But when Deacon Dollar came along, I was so glad he was assigned here. So he and I had a lot of fun with each other. We were actually good friends before he got ordained, because I was one of his references. And I said, this guy would be great, get him in formation. But deacons are the sign of Christ the servant. So priests and bishops are the sacramental sign of Christ the shepherd. Okay? Leading a diocese, that's what a bishop does. Leading a parish, that's what a priest does. There are associate pastors or parochial vicars. There's another word for us. So Father Ferguson is our parochial vicar. He helps Monsignor Maloney. But Father Ferguson is also a priest and a sacramental sign of Christ the shepherd. So Monsignor Maloney and Father Ferguson are shepherding this parish. Father DeVille, who is a retired priest and helps out on the weekend, is helping shepherd the parish. They have the priests have the faculty to say Mass, to do confession, anointing of the sick, preside at weddings. Priests can occasionally get permission from the bishop to do confirmations. Priests are not the ordinary ministers of confirmation, but they can be delegated by the bishop to do that. So, say the bishop is due here, and sometime in March he's due here to do confirmations. Well, if Bishop Fernandez wakes up with the flu that morning, is looking at his COVID test and sees 2 stripes, he's going to call up and say, Monsignor Maloney, I delegate you, and he'll send a document to verifying that, to do the confirmation today because nobody wants me around because I've got the flu or I've got COVID or something. That happens. Bishops get sick too. They're not immune to disease. And but the ordinary minister of confirmation is bishops. And again, if it's an ordination, though, they have to find another bishop. So the sacraments that a deacon can preside at are marriage and weddings. I'm sorry, weddings and baptisms. So I've probably baptized, I'm guessing, about 700-800 kids over the last 18 years. And I'm just guessing because I never kept count. And I have presided at about 70 or 80 weddings. Okay, so generally those are a lot of fun. So anyway, deacons can do extreme unction. That's taking the final communion with someone. And we certainly visit the sick, and we cannot do confession, reconciliation. Deacons cannot preside at Mass, but you see us up there assisting at Mass. So we're just there assisting. And deacons are have in our diocese the faculty to preach on occasion. So once a month, you get to hear Deacon Dollar and I. And then deacons do all sorts of other things like teach RCIA, work with annulments, and so forth. So we do lots of things that help out around the parish. Okay. Got 7 minutes to go here. I'm giving you your money's worth here tonight. Yes.
Does a deacon, do they have, like, I know the priests are allotted like a certain time limit at their whatever parish at a time. Now, how about deacons? Are they there at their church all the time, or do they get moved as well? Like saying, okay, you're 7 or 9 years, you're up here, or whatever it is, 13 years, do you have to go to another parish? How does that work?
In our diocese, deacons have a 1-year tenure, and then we have to sign a new ministry agreement every year with our pastor. So every July, Monsignor Maloney gets the little forms from Deacon Dollar and I have to sign the ministry agreement. My wife has to sign it. Monsignor signs it, and then the director of the diaconate signs it, and that spells out what we do. Deacons are to average about 10 hours of ministry at their parish every week, and we ask them not to go over. No, it's average, so I've had some weeks where I'm here 20 hours. I've had some weeks where I'm here for 3 or 4 hours. I have some weeks where I'm not here, but it averages out. If we find a deacon doing too much week in and week out, guess who we get a phone call from at the bishop's office first? Who do you think?
Wife.
Who do you think? Wife, yeah. So sometimes a wife calls up and says, I never see my husband anymore since you people ordained him. So let me call him up and say, come on in, we gotta talk about this, because you're not supposed to forget your family when you're a deacon. So, and Monsignor Maloney here is wonderful about keeping that all balanced. So at Christmas time, Monsignor asks Deacon Dollar and I to help out on Christmas Eve. And then he says, you guys take Christmas off, spend Christmas Day with your family. Same thing with Easter. He always gives us Easter Sunday off. But, there's a lot of behind the scenes work we're doing too. We're on the Deacon Dollar Liturgy Committee, where Deacon Dollar's running the ministry to the sick here. I'm running the cancer ministry and a few other things and so forth. And like I said, taking our turns with enrollments, helping people and so forth. Sometimes we do spiritual direction. We've been asked to do that too. So deacons have a formation that covers that. Priests do those things too. But there's a lot of behind the scenes work. It's not just coming in on Sunday and helping out on the altar. The clergy here are doing all sorts of things for people. Let me talk about vestments for a second. But I want you to understand the basic theology, because there's a fundamental difference between what a deacon does and what a priest or a bishop does. Okay. Now every priest and bishop has been a deacon, and hopefully they take to heart that servant experience and so forth. But and every bishop was a priest, so the bishop has been ordained 3 times. The vestments you see, and during the church year calendar presentation, they would have gone over the different colors and things and what those mean. Every priest and deacon and bishop wears a alb, and that's the ministerial undergarment. And lay people can wear albs too. There's a lot of parishes where servers will wear albs. Now here our servers wear a cassock and surplice, and the black undergarment and the white one. But there's a lot of parishes where servers will wear just an alb. So that's a reflection of baptism. Now, every priest, deacon, and bishop wears a stole. Okay, a deacon stole starts over here. It's always on your shoulder, goes across like this, and hangs down. When we have everything on, it's a little hard to see the stole. A deacon stole is meant to, because deacons also are the normative declarers of the gospel. And even at a papal mass, you'll see a deacon declaring the gospel. So that stole is a symbol of being a messenger of the gospel. And it harkens back to when people would have message pouches and a strap here. So that's why a deacon stole looks like that. So if you ever see Deacon Dowlery without our dalmatic on, you'll see we have a stole that goes across and down. A priest stole goes around his neck and straight down. Okay. We always wear a cincture, which is a rope that basically holds you together. Because an alb looks a lot better if you have a cincture on, and it's just a rope, and you have to learn how to tie it properly. So when Deacon Dowler started, I was showing him how to tie the cincture. Monsignor Maloney came along and I said, "Hey, Monsignor, look, I'm showing him the ropes." He chuckled. So we all wear a cincture, and sometimes I forget to put my cincture on, and then I'm going down the aisle, and all of a sudden I trip a little bit. Oh, doggone it! And you have to hike it up, because without a cincture on, your stole gets under your alb gets under your feet. Deacons wear a dalmatic, and that's the outer garment, and it's always the same color that the celebrant is wearing. And we have all the colors here: green, purple, rose, white with blue, white with gold, and I think I have them all. Violet, yeah, violet. And I have dalmatics in all those colors. You can tell if it's a dalmatic because it has sleeves, big long long sleeves. Dalmatics originated in, it was a garment that originated in Dalmatia, which is a part of modern day Croatia. So they call it Dalmatic. What the Dalmatians were doing with those, I can't remember. And then chasubles are worn by priests and bishops. They come over him and they don't have sleeves. So it's open all the way across. So that's that. Any other questions about holy orders? I just threw a lot at you. So. But, you know, they're topics that are near and dear to my heart. I love being ordained. I love being married. And any questions? Yes, Amanda.
As a priest or a deacon, do you get to choose where you are, or do you just get assigned somewhere? Or like, at any point could they say like you have to move on here? Or?
Oh, the way that works is with priests, the bishop will announce openings that are coming up. So some guys might be retiring, somebody might have moved to a different parish in the diocese. So those openings are announced. Different priests can express their interest in it, and then a personnel board of priests will meet and discuss that and advise the bishop on it and advise him on who he thinks are good fits. And then the bishop will make his decisions. The personnel board for priests does not decide for him. They just advise, and then the bishop assigns him. With deacons, it's a little different. There's not a personnel board that meets, but the vicar for clergy, who right now is Father Bill Hahn, will talk to the bishop about the deacons. There is a diaconate director and an assistant diaconate director in the diocese. Deacon Frank Anarino is the director right now. He had a long history over at Bishop Watterson. Deacon Steve Petrill is the associate director of the office. And those guys will talk to the bishop about where the deacons are assigned and what are good fits and where should they, because the bishop's trying to get even coverage across the diocese. And, you know, if he sees a parish with no deacon here and there's 3 deacons over at this one, he might ask, could one of you go over here? With deacons, you have to remember, now priests can be asked to just pick up and move all over the diocese. A deacon, though, who is married has a home that he's bought and a job and so forth. I'm one of the few deacons who works full-time for the church because I'm the chancellor of the diocese as my day job. Most deacons have regular old jobs, and you know, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're vice presidents of corporations, contractors, and so forth. They have every profession you could think of. I know one deacon who is a chef. I know another deacon who helps design salad dressing formulas and stuff. So another deacon who's a chemical engineer. So all sorts of skill sets there. But the bishop, if you live in Columbus, the bishop's not going to say to a deacon, well, you're going down to Portsmouth. It's a long commute. So the bishop is very conscientious of that. So when a deacon is asked to move, it's going to be somewhere reasonably close to where he lives. And the bishop is going to say, I'm hoping you'll consider being here. Technically, I think he could order you, but every bishop I've worked for, I'm on my 4th bishop now, very conscientious about family life and things like that. So they're not going to make you drive all the way from Columbus to Zanesville or something like that, or from New Philadelphia over to West Jefferson. It'd take hours. So the bishop takes all that into consideration. Wives kind of have a veto because if the wife says, oh, heck no, you're not going that far away. The bishop has to take that into account because he doesn't want to disrupt that existing family life because we were married and parents before we were ordained. So when I was first ordained, I was assigned to St. Joan of Arc up in Powell. I spent 4 years there. I did tell my bishop that I had a willingness to go to another parish if there was a parish that did not have any deacons, and Bishop Campbell said I could use a deacon at St. Andrew, so I've been here for the last 14 years. I've been ordained for 18 years, so spent most of my diaconate right here. So, I live up off of Hart Road, and actually, when I stop by the parish after work, it's right on the way. So, I don't think any bishop would put a family through duress over that. So that's all that extra thought that goes into. And when Bishop Campbell asked me would I go to St. Andrew from St. John's, he said, think about it, talk to your wife, then tell me what your answer is. And my wife said, yeah, give it a try. So we've been very happy here ever since. Priests and deacons get to retire from active ministry at 70. They are permitted, I'm not going over, I'm sorry. They are permitted to go longer if the bishop agrees that they're up for it. So when I hit 70, which is 10 years from now, I probably will start scaling back a bit, semi-retire and so forth. But I'll still keep teaching RCIA though. But I might get out of weddings and annulments. But anyway, because once you start getting over 70, you slow down a bit and so forth. But there are some guys out there who are still pastors and they're 75, 76.
And Father DeVille is about...
He's 84.
84. So you'll
Going on
see him.
85. Now he's not a pastor.
No.
He's a weekend assistant, and those guys love that because they still get to do all that priestly ministry, but they're not in charge of the affairs. And usually it's a huge relief. Father DeVille always says, "Oh, I'm just as busy as I ever was," and sometimes I say, "Yeah, but you're not in charge of the yes, thank God." So there's some of that going on. Anyway, if you got more, I gotta let you go because it's almost 8:40 here, and my couple's waiting for me. But if you have any more questions, just reach out, talk to any of us about marriage or that and so forth. I gotta go grab my briefcase.
Do you want to give me your name tag?
Thank you, gosh, Deacon, you really... You got it? All right. So, same time, same place next week. I thought actually I wanted to explain one thing that's kind of cool. Each month, the Pope puts out prayer intentions. I don't know if you know this, but this month, the prayer intention worldwide, so there's about 1 billion Catholics, you keep on the forefront, we pray for parishes. So I thought that was kind of cool to wrap our night, that we're going to pray for St. Andrew Parish, and that parishes can be a great light to others. And then we'll close with the Our Father and Hail Mary. I want those prayers to get really, you feel comfortable praying them. So in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us here tonight. We lift up in the new month of February, that we lift up all parishes throughout the world, especially St. Andrew's, and for the priests here, the deacons here, the families here, and all of our catechumens and candidates, and the gift of being able to be here tonight. We pray these intentions through the heart of Mary as we pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. No, you're welcome to the Men's and Women's Conference. We have a couple more flyers. I'll be doing the radio for the Women's Conference that day, so I'll definitely be there.